rd.camp, knowledge, grammar, and spelling. 41 little grammar rules to follow to sound smarter. Reader's Digest Editors. Updated July 2018-2021. Come on, make your high school English teacher proud. One of one of 41. Hopefully against I hope. Emma Capotes, are these I stock? What's the difference? Hopefully against I hope. Hopefully means in a hopeful manner. I hope the boss let us out early. And hopefully the boss let us out early aren't the same thing. On the other hand, these are grammar rules you can safely ignore. Two of 41. Importantly against important. What's the difference? Importantly versus important. More or most important is probably what you want. Only if you are a pompous blowhard do you say things importantly. 3. Their versus his or her. What's the difference? Their versus his or her. Everyone, everybody, and close cousin each are singular. So words that refers to them should also be singular. Or since we all have our grammar hand-ups, you could just rephrase the sentence. Don't misplace your modifiers. 4. I versus me. What's the difference? I versus me. Between you and I sounds fancy and therefore right, but don't be so quick to belittle Cookie Monster. Me want cookies. In this case, me is correct because it's the object of the preposition between. Find out the 12 grammar errors that even smart people make. We all have been there. 5. What's the difference? Accessible versus accessible. A library is wheelchair accessible. Your house is accessible by the county that taxes it. Nothing's funner than grammar, but is funner a word during the debate. Badly versus bad. Is your sense of touch physically impaired? Almost never. Or are you feeling some guilty after screwing up? Almost always. In the former, you feel badly. The later, you feel bad. 7. Equally as versus equally. What's the difference equally as versus equally? The as isn't necessary. I speak Latin and speak Latin equally well. Have you been lied to? Because versus that. What's the difference because versus that? You never mean the reason is because, you mean the reason is that. Why? The word reasons implies because. Likewise, why say the reason why when you can say the reason? Lay versus lie. What's the difference? Lay versus lie. This is another case where people think wrongly that a particular word sounds more educated. lay and lie are not interchangeable. Lie doesn't require an object. In I need no I need to lay down, but lay does. I need to lay my head down. Confusing kicks in because of the past tense of both verbs. Lie becomes laid, but the usage stays the same. 10. Lounge versus long. What's the difference? Lounge versus long. Chaise lounge is actually incorrect, and people have been getting this wrong for at least a century. The proper phrase in French and translated as long chair, because we know you are guilty of saying change long. 11. ATM versus ATM machine. What's the difference? ATM versus ATM machine. Using the phrases ATM machine, automated teller machine, or PIN number, personal identification number, is redundant. Fill out the 12. Historical versus historic. What's the difference? Historical versus historic. Historic. In short, historic means significant, a historical action. But if you intend occurring in or relating to history, go with historical. Think historical data or a historical link between the two world's wars. By the way, it's never an historical event. The vowel sounds a should precede a consonant sound, like the hard H in history. 13. That versus who. What's the difference? That versus who. A human is a who. Anything else? Yes, including animals, is that. Find out this. 14. Cooled off versus cool have. What's the difference? Cooled off versus cool have. The error pops up because of the similar pronunciations. But remember, every sentence needs a verb. I could have written a better cover letter. 15. Most everyone versus everyone. What's the difference? Most everyone versus everyone. Make up your mind. If you truly mean every person, use just everyone. If not, say most people. 16. Nauseous versus nauseated. What's the difference? Nauseous versus nauseated. In strict terms, nauseous means to cause nausea, as in a hateful, nauseous person. Nauseated means afflicted with nausea, as in I'm nauseated. 17. Very unique versus unique. What's the difference? Very unique versus unique. No need to say very unique thing and people are one of a kind, absolute. 18. Intensive purposes versus intense and purposes. What's the difference? Intensive purposes and intense and purposes. The right phrase to say is intense and purposes. But even if you don't get it right, you don't need this expression. It's just filler. 19. Literally lounged my head off versus lounged my head off. What's the difference? Literally lounged my head off versus lounged my head off. Literally means actually, in and is best reserved for a real events. Merge together versus merge. What's the difference? Merge together versus merge. Phrase merge together is redundant, as are combinations like absolute necessity, free gift, and a pair of twins, unless you mean two sets of twins. That's it. That is. 21. Orientate versus orient. What's the difference? Orientate versus orient. Orientate is a word, but it means to face east. The tour was designed to orient new students. 22. Impact versus affect. What's the difference? Impact versus affect. Impact should be forces into service as a verb. No, the decision impacts everyone. Yes, the decision affects everyone. Also avoid this 7. 23. Off versus off. What's the difference? Off versus off. Skip off because words are perfectly fine of their own. May I bounce idea of you? 24. In order versus to. What's the difference in order to versus to? See above. 25. Comprises of versus comprises. What's the difference? Comprised of versus comprises. Comprises equals includes. You never said my grocery list includes of milk, eggs, and kiwis. Same goes for comprises. Use or with use of with compose. The sculpture is composed or of wire hangers. 26. Preventative versus preventive. What's the difference? Preventative versus preventive. Grammar sovereign H.W. Fowler banned the long form preventative almost 100 years ago. So someone who is health conscious might seek preventive care. Responsible homeowners might take preventive measures to keep their roof from leaking. 27. Infamous versus famous. What's the difference in famous versus famous? The rich and famous are widely known and wealthy, but the rich and infamous have a reputation of the worst kind. Another way to look at it, unless Aunt Donna's chocolate chip cookies are notoriously evil and disgraceful, are they famous, not infamous? 28. Evoke versus invoke. What's the difference? Evoke versus invoke. A photograph evokes emotion. A joke evokes louder. Evoke means to elicit or call forth. Save invoke for when you mean to call on a higher power, petition to support or implement. For example, Allison invoked Robert Frost to the first assignment, or the principal evokes the aid of the teachers. 29. Denounce versus renounce. What's the difference? Denounce versus renounce. The two may sound similar, but their meaning are distinct. Denounce is to condemn publicly or accuse formally. The judge denounced the CEO for insider trading, while renounce means to give up or refuse to follow. The CEO renounced his not guilty plea. 30. Uninterested versus disinterested. What's the difference? Uninterested versus disinterested. Careful speakers who wish to convey a lack of bias want to use disinterested, Speakers who don't care about such grammatical subtleties, subtleties are uninterested. 31. Myself versus I. What's the difference, myself versus I? Myself is notoriously misused for I or me, often because people are trying too hard, it seems, to sound smarter. Wrong. My husband and myself have belonged to the country club for years. Myself is pronounced best reserved for reflexive uses. Then an action is directed towards our subject. For Christmas, I gave myself a gift. Or for emphasis, I myself have done that many times. 32. Former versus latter. What's the difference, former versus latter? The difference is clear cut. Yet writers and speakers sometimes muff these two simple. Former is the two first of two. Latter is the second. And while we are at it formally versus formally, the former means at an early time, as in formerly the government of California Schwarzenegger was the latter means by an established form of or structure, as in the school is formally called the University of California at Los Angeles. 33. Neither either are versus neither either is. What's the difference? Neither either are versus neither either is. Both neither and either are singular pronouns and should take a singular verb. Confusion sets in when the verb appears far from its subject or when a plural object falls after it. Turns out neither of the usually mischievous dogs was responsible for treating up the pillows. The cat was to blame. 34. Fall between versus fall through. What's the difference? Fall between versus fall through. Logically speaking, you can fall between an opening you fall into or through it. As such, don't let logic fall through the cracks when you use this idiom. 35. Mute versus moot. What's the difference? Mute versus moot. Moot most common meaning is the private practical significance. Mute means silent. So while they might want to be mute about a moot point, speakers will be vocal about the difference. 36. Just desserts versus just desserts. What's the difference? Just desserts versus just desserts. When you want someone to get what he deserves, you hope he reaps his just desserts. But on her birthday, a particularly well-behaved 3-year-old might be allowed in just desserts. 37. Modern day versus modern. What's the difference? Modern day versus modern. Quite simple. Modern covers it. A modern day is a redundant term. Modern speakers will sound smarter by using the superior word. 38. So-called good grammar versus so-called good grammar. What's the difference? So-called good grammar versus so-called good grammar. So-called introduces a term as falsely, improperly, or commonly referred to as something. By default it covers the need for quotation marks or a speaker's air quotes. 30, 39. Exorbitant versus exuberant. What's the difference? Exorbitant versus exuberant. While both mean extreme, the terms are often confused in relation to money. Exuberant refers to unrestrained enthusiasm or flamboyance. Exorbitant means exceeding an appropriate amount. Another way to look at it, exuberant use of a credit card leads to an exorbitant bill down the road. 40. Come versus go. What's the difference? Come versus go. Come refers to movement towards the speaker. Henry says, come to Paris. Go denotes opposite. After you've stayed 2 months, Henry says, you should go. But idiomatic use sometimes cool clouds this rule as I will come over is more comprehensible than I will go over. 41. Jealous versus envious. What's the difference? Jealous versus envious. Great grammarian Brian Gardner reminds us that jealousy connotes feelings of resentment toward another, particularly in matters relating to an intimate relationship, while envy refers to covetousness of another's advantage, possessions, or abilities. So your ex is jealous of your new boyfriend, but envious of your ability to use these two terms correctly. Originally published August 22, 2019.